Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're going to dive into a gripping story of love, loyalty, and survival as we uncover whether Jack and Tử Tiên can overcome the company's financial collapse after serious bridge construction violations left them unable to even pay the bank interest. Will love be enough to carry them through their darkest chapter? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. Even though Jack had finally stopped investing in those fake projects, the damage had already been done. Stopping in time saved him from losing everything, but it didn't erase what had already disappeared. The earlier investments, the deposits, the entry fees, the so-called private placement opportunities, each one had taken a piece of his financial foundation. And when Jack finally sat down with his accountant to look at the numbers, the truth hit harder than any threatening message from the scammers. His company was in trouble. Not destroyed, not finished, but definitely shaken. For a long time, Jack had tried to separate his personal mistakes from his business. He told himself the company was still strong. He told himself the losses were manageable. He told himself that as long as new clients kept coming in, everything would eventually balance out. But numbers don't care about hope. The cash reserve was thinner than he expected. Supplier payments were coming due. 2 major clients had delayed invoices. Payroll was only 3 weeks away. And one expansion project Jack had already approved now looked dangerously expensive. His accountant, Mr. Howard, sat across from him in the conference room with the folder open on the table. He didn't speak harshly. He didn't blame Jack. But his expression said enough. "We can survive this," Mr. Howard said carefully, "but only if we act quickly." Jack looked at the spreadsheet in front of him. "How quickly?" Mr. Howard paused. "Immediately." That word stayed in the room like a warning. Jack leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Outside the glass walls, his employees were working like nothing had changed. Designers were reviewing mock-ups. The sales team was making calls. The operations staff were handling orders. Everything looked normal from the outside. But Jack knew the truth. The company was standing on a floor that had started to crack. And the worst part was that none of his employees knew why. They trusted him. They believed he was making smart decisions. They saw him as a confident founder, someone who could handle pressure and still lead the team forward. But now, behind the calm face he tried to show every morning, Jack was carrying a secret that grew heavier by the hour. The company wasn't struggling because the market collapsed. It wasn't struggling because the product failed. It wasn't struggling because the team made mistakes. It was struggling because Jack had chased promises that were never real. That guilt followed him everywhere. When he walked past the finance department, he felt it. When he saw employees laughing during lunch, he felt it. When his assistant asked if he wanted to approve a small office upgrade, he felt it even more. Every expense suddenly looked personal. Every invoice felt like a reminder. Every normal business decision became a question of survival. That evening, Jack stayed late in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The lights were dim, and the city outside looked calm, almost peaceful. But inside Jack's head, everything was moving too fast. He opened a list of potential partners on his laptop. These were people and companies he had worked with before, large distributors, strategic investors, industry contacts, and business owners who had once praised his company's potential. Some had even told him, "If you ever need support, let us know." Now Jack needed support, so he started making calls. The first call was to a major distributor named Reynolds Group. They had worked with Jack's company on several successful campaigns. The director, Mr. Carter, had always been friendly, always talking about long-term cooperation. The situation carefully. He didn't reveal every personal detail, but he was honest enough. He told Carter the company had experienced a temporary cash flow issue and needed short-term financial support or an advance on upcoming contracts. At first, Carter sounded sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jack," he said. "You built a good company." Jack felt a small spark of hope. Then Carter continued, "But right now, our board is tightening external funding. We're not in a position to extend advances." Jack swallowed. "I understand. Maybe we could structure it as a purchase commitment, or I wish I could help." Carter interrupted gently, "But the timing isn't good. The timing isn't good." Jack thanked him and ended the call. Then he called another partner, then another, and another. Some didn't answer. Some promised to review internally and never called back. Some were polite but distant, and some gave answers so cold Jack almost wished they had not picked up at all. "Your current risk profile was too high. We need to protect our own liquidity. We value the relationship, but we can't be involved right now. Maybe once your financial position stabilizes." That last one almost made Jack laugh. Once his financial position stabilized, he wouldn't need their help. By midnight, Jack had called 7 major partners, 7 conversations, 7 rejections, 7 doors closing one after another. He sat in silence, staring at the screen as the list of names blurred in front of him. For years, people had surrounded Jack when things were going well. They showed up at product launches. They shook his hand at events. They congratulated him in public. They talked about partnership, loyalty, and shared vision. But the moment he needed real help, their smiles turned into careful distance. Jack didn't blame them completely. Business was business. Everyone had their own risks, their own shareholders, their own balance sheets. But understanding that didn't make it hurt less. The next morning, Jack arrived at the office earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the coffee in his hand tasted bitter. He walked into the conference room and found Mr. Howard already waiting for him. "Any luck?" Mr. Howard asked. Jack placed his phone on the table. "No." Mr. Howard nodded slowly as if he had expected that answer. Jack looked at him. "What happens if we can't secure support?" Mr. Howard didn't answer immediately. That silence was worse than bad news. "We cut expenses," he said at last. "Delay non-essential projects. Renegotiate supplier terms. Reduce marketing spend. Possibly freeze hiring." Jack nodded. "And payroll?" Mr. Howard looked down at the papers. "If we make the right moves, we can protect payroll for now." For now. Jack hated those 2 words. Because for now meant temporary safety. It meant the next problem was already waiting somewhere ahead. Later that day, Jack called an emergency leadership meeting. Around the table sat the people who had helped build the company with him. Maya from operations, Daniel from sales, Priya from product, and Louis from marketing. They all looked at him with concern because Jack rarely called meetings without a clear agenda. He stood at the head of the table, hands resting on the chair in front of him. "I need to be honest with all of you," he began. The room became still. "We're facing a cash flow problem. It's serious, but it's not impossible to handle. I'm working on solutions, and our priority is to protect the team, protect our clients, and keep the company moving." No one spoke for a moment. Then Maya asked, "How bad is it?" Jack looked at her. "Bad enough that I'm scared." But he didn't say that. "Bad enough that we need to make changes immediately," he said, "but not bad enough to give up." Daniel crossed his arms. "Is this because of the delayed client payments?" Jack hesitated. That would have been the easy answer. He could have blamed the market. He could have blamed clients. He could have blamed clients. He could have blamed timing. But after everything that had happened, Jack was tired of hiding from the truth. "Partly," he said, "but there were also financial decisions I made outside the core business that affected our reserves. I take responsibility for that." The room changed. Not dramatically. No one shouted. No one accused him. But the energy shifted. Trust, once cracked, makes a sound, even in silence. Priya looked down at her notebook. Louis leaned back, processing what he had just heard. Maya kept her eyes on Jack. Unreadable. Jack continued. "I know this is not what you wanted to hear, but I'd rather tell you the truth now than pretend everything is fine until it's too late." That sentence seemed to matter. Maya finally spoke. "Okay, then we need a survival plan. Not anger, not blame. A plan." Jack looked at her, surprised. She opened her laptop. "We need to separate what keeps the company alive from what only makes the company look bigger. Those are not the same thing." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sales can push renewals forward. I can talk to existing clients and offer early payment discounts." Priya added. "Product can pause the new feature rollout. It hurts, but it frees up contractor costs. Louis sighed. Marketing can cut paid ads for 2 weeks and focus on organic channels. It won't be pretty, but it buys time. Jack looked around the room. For the first time in days, he felt something other than fear. Not relief exactly, but movement. The big partners had turned him away. The companies with deep pockets had refused to take the risk. The people who once praised his growth had suddenly become unavailable. But here, in this room, the people with the most to lose were still trying to help him save the company. Jack's throat tightened. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. Maya looked at him. "Maybe not," she said, "but the company does, and the people here do." That hit Jack harder than criticism would have, because she was right. This wasn't about protecting his pride anymore. It wasn't about proving he was still a brilliant founder. It was about protecting the people who had trusted him with their careers. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. A painful one. They would freeze all new hiring, pause the expansion project, renegotiate supplier contracts, push for early client payments, cut discretionary spending, delay the office upgrade, and Jack would take no salary until the company stabilized. When Jack announced that last part, Daniel looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" Jack nodded. "I caused part of this. I should carry the first cut." No one argued, and somehow that made the moment even heavier. For the next several days, the office changed. Not completely, but enough to feel different. The energy became quieter, more focused. People spoke in lower voices. Managers reviewed expenses line by line. Jack spent hours calling suppliers explaining the situation without sounding desperate. Some agreed to extend payment terms, some refused. A few demanded partial payment immediately. Every small victory mattered, every rejection hurt, and still Jack kept going. But the real question remained, would it be enough? One evening after another long day of negotiations, Jack was preparing to leave the office when his assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Her name is Elena Ward." Jack froze. He hadn't heard that name in almost 4 years. Elena Ward was not one of his current partners. She wasn't part of his investor circle. She wasn't someone he had called for help. But once, back when Jack's company was just beginning, she had been one of the few people who believed in him before anyone else did. Jack slowly stood up. "Send her in." A moment later, Elena walked through the door, calm and confident, with the same sharp eyes Jack remembered. She looked around the office, then back at him. "You look terrible," she said. Jack gave a tired laugh. "Good to see you too." Elena didn't smile. "I heard you were in trouble." Jack's face became serious. "From who? Does it matter?" Jack didn't answer. Elena stepped closer and placed a folder on his desk. "I'm not here for small talk," she said. "I'm here because I think your company is still worth saving." Jack stared at the folder. For the first time in what felt like forever, a door had opened. But he didn't know yet whether Elena had come to help him or to take control of everything he had built. Jack stared at the folder on his desk for a long moment. Elena Ward stood across from him, completely calm, as if she hadn't just walked into the middle of the most difficult week of his life. She didn't rush him. She didn't try to explain herself right away. She simply waited, letting the silence press down on the room. Finally, Jack looked up. "What is this?" he asked. Elena pulled out the chair in front of his desk and sat down. "A proposal." Jack gave a tired smile. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Elena said, "but not in the way you think." He opened the folder. Inside were printed financial summaries, market notes, a restructuring outline, and a short-term funding plan. Jack quickly realized this wasn't something Elena had prepared casually. She had studied his company. She had looked at the numbers. She knew more about his situation than most people outside the leadership team. His expression tightened. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know you made a serious mistake," Elena said. "And enough to know the company doesn't deserve to die because of it." Jack looked down. There was no comfort in her words, but there was honesty. And at that point, honesty felt more useful than sympathy. Elena leaned forward. You still have clients. You still have a capable team. Your product still has market demand. Your problem is liquidity, not relevance. Jack looked at the documents again. Liquidity can still kill a company. Yes, she replied. That's why I'm here. Jack slowly turned the pages. The proposal included emergency bridge financing, supplier negotiation support, and operational restructuring. But then he saw the section that made his stomach tighten. Equity conversion rights, board oversight, spending approval limits. Elena wasn't offering charity. She was offering money in exchange for control. Not complete control, but enough to change the balance of power inside the company. Jack closed the folder. So that's it, he said quietly. You helped me survive, and I give up part of the company. Elena didn't deny it. You give up part of the company to save the whole thing. Jack let out a breath. The sentence was simple, painfully simple. A month ago, he would have rejected it immediately. He would have told himself he could solve everything alone. He would have said no one had the right to step into what he had built. But now, after the scam, after the losses, after 7 major partners had turned him away, pride didn't feel as strong as it used to. Still, the thought hurt. This company was not just a business to Jack. It was years of sleepless nights. It was borrowed desks and cheap coffee. It was early clients who almost said no. It was the first employee who believed in him. It was every risk he took before people started calling him successful. And now, because of his own mistakes, he might have to give away a piece of it just to keep it alive. Elena seemed to understand what he was thinking. Jack, she said, I'm not here to punish you. But I'm also not here to rescue you without accountable. Edie, he looked at her. She continued, when I first met you, you were hungry, focused, careful because you had no room to be careless. Somewhere along the way, you started confusing speed with progress. Big numbers with real value. Confidence with judgment. Jack didn't respond because every word landed exactly where it needed to. Elena's voice softened slightly. That doesn't mean you're finished, but it does mean you need guardrails. Jack looked away toward the dark window. Outside, the city lights reflected against the glass. For a second, he could see himself faintly in the reflection, tired, older than he felt, and far less certain than the version of himself he showed the world. What happens if I say no? He asked. Elena answered without hesitation. You may still survive. Maybe your team pulls off a miracle. Maybe clients pay early. Maybe suppliers agree to wait. But if 1 or 2 things go wrong, you'll be forced into worse terms later. Jack opened the folder again. And if I say yes, you get breathing room. 90 days of operating stability, a clean restructuring plan, stronger financial oversight, and a chance to rebuild trust before the damage spreads. Trust. That word was everywhere now. Trust from employees, trust from partners, trust from clients, trust in himself. Jack realized that money was only one part of the crisis. The deeper problem was credibility. His decisions had shaken the foundation, and no loan could repair that by itself. I need to discuss this with my leadership team, he said. Elena nodded. Good. If you had accepted immediately, I would have walked away. For the first time, Jack almost smiled. Of course she would. The next morning, Jack called Maya, Daniel, Priya, Louis, and Mr. Howard into the conference room. Elena joined them too, sitting quietly at the far end of the table while Jack explained the proposal. No one interrupted, but their faces changed as they read through the terms. Daniel was the first to speak. So she gets equity and approval rights over major spending? Elena answered directly. Temporary approval rights tied to the bridge period and restructuring milestones. Maya looked at her. And if we miss the milestones? Then the company needs deeper intervention, Elena said. That's not a threat, that's math. Louis leaned back. I hate that answer. Elena glanced at him. Most people hate math when it arrives after optimism. The room went quiet. Jack expected tension, maybe even anger. But what followed was more serious than that. Questions. Hard questions. Maya asked about supplier payments. Daniel asked about client confidence. Priya asked whether product development would be permanently slowed. Mr. Howard asked about repayment structure, equity dilution, and the impact on future fundraising. Elena answered each one clearly. No sugarcoating, no motivational speech, no empty promises. That, strangely, made the proposal feel more trustworthy. After 2 hours, Jack asked Elena to step outside so the leadership team could talk privately. When the door closed, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then Maya spoke. "I don't like giving up control." "Neither do I," Jack said. She looked at him. "But I like bankruptcy less." Daniel nodded slowly. "The bridge gives us time, and time is what we don't have." Priya tapped her pen against the table. "I care more about the oversight than the money. If we accept, we need to show the team that this isn't just a bailout. It has to be a reset." Louis looked at Jack. "And you need to be ready for people to question you." Jack didn't defend himself. "I know, no," Louis said. "I mean really question you, not behind your back, in meetings, on decisions, on budgets, on priorities." Jack held his gaze. "Then they should." That answer seemed to surprise everyone, including Jack himself, but he meant it. The old version of him would have seen questioning as disrespect. Old version would have wanted loyalty to look like agreement. But after what happened, Jack understood something he should have learned earlier. Strong leadership doesn't mean never being challenged. Sometimes it means building a structure where bad decisions can be stopped before they become disasters. By the end of the discussion, the team agreed. Not happily, not easily, but clearly. They would accept Elena's offer, with a few negotiated changes to protect employees, limit unnecessary cuts, and make the oversight structure transparent. When Elena returned, Jack didn't give a dramatic speech. He simply said, "We're willing to move forward, but we have conditions." Elena smiled faintly. "Good, now you sound like a CEO again." The next few weeks were brutal. Elena's money gave the company breathing room, but it didn't make the pain disappear. Expenses were cut. Projects were paused. Supplier terms were renegotiated one by one. Every department had to justify spending. Every manager had to rethink what was truly essential. Some employees became nervous when they heard about restructuring. A few asked if layoffs were coming. Jack held an all-hands meeting before rumors could grow out of control. He stood in front of the team, not as the untouchable founder he used to pretend to be, but as someone who had been humbled. "We are going through a difficult period," he said. "I made decisions that affected our financial position, and I take responsibility for that. We have secured support to stabilize the company, but support alone is not enough. We are changing how we operate, how we approve spending, and how we protect this business going forward." No one clapped. No one cheered, but they listened, and that mattered more. Jack continued. "My priority is to protect the team and protect the work we've built together. I can't promise this will be easy, but I can promise I won't hide the truth from you." That promise became the beginning of something new. Slowly, the company started to steady itself. Daniel convinced 2 major clients to renew early in exchange for better long-term pricing. Maya negotiated extended payment terms with 3 key suppliers. Priya redesigned the product roadmap so the company could keep improving without burning too much cash. Louis shifted marketing toward customer stories, partnerships, and organic content that cost less but felt more authentic. And Jack learned to listen, really listen. He stopped walking into meetings with answers already prepared. He asked for risk assessments. He reviewed financial reports twice a week. He let Mr. Howard challenge his assumptions. He let Elena question his plans. And when someone on the team raised concerns, he no longer saw it as negativity. He saw it as protection. One evening about 6 weeks after Elena's return, Jack stayed late in the office again. But this time, the silence felt different. The company was not fully safe yet. There were still debts to manage, relationships to repair, and trust to rebuild. But payroll was covered. Client revenue was improving. Suppliers were cooperating. And most importantly, the team was still there. Elena found him in the conference room, looking over a new financial dashboard. "You're still here?" she asked. Jack looked up. "So are you." She walked in and glanced at the screen. "Numbers are improving." "A little," Jack said. "A little is how recovery usually starts." He nodded. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Jack said, "Why did you help me?" Elena crossed her arms. "I didn't help you." Jack looked at her. "I helped the company," she said. "And maybe I helped a version of you I thought still existed." Jack absorbed that quietly. "Do you think that version is still here?" Elena studied him for a moment. "No," she said. Jack looked down. Then she added, "I think he's being replaced by someone better." That was the closest thing to encouragement Elena ever gave E, and somehow it meant more because of that. By the end of the quarter, the company had not fully recovered, but it had survived the most dangerous stage. Revenue was not back to where it had been, but cash flow was stable. The leadership team was stronger. The financial controls were clearer, and Jack no longer made major decisions alone. The crisis had cost him money. It had cost him equity. It had cost him pride. But it also forced him to face the truth about the kind of leader he had become, and the kind of leader he still had a chance to be. One afternoon, Jack walked through the office and saw his team working with quiet focus. Not everything was perfect. Some people still looked at him differently. Some trust would take months, maybe years, to fully rebuild. But no one had given up. That alone felt like a miracle. As he returned to his office, Jack saw a note on his desk from Maya. It said, "Survival plan update, we're ahead of schedule." Jack waited twice. Then he sat down, opened his laptop, and looked at the company budget. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the urge to chase a shortcut. No secret deal. No miracle investment. No fake opportunity promising fast results. Just the slow, difficult, honest work of rebuilding. And maybe that was the real help Jack had needed all along. Not someone to erase the consequences. Not someone to save him without cost. But someone willing to stand at the edge of the collapse and say, "This can still be saved if you're ready to change." Jack had almost lost everything by believing in illusions. Now, he would have to earn everything back to reality. One decision at a time.